Welcome back. College costs, as you know, are soaring, and so are the amount of people who are taking on debt just to go to college. According to a new report released this week, the share of undergraduates who use federal student aid to help pay for college jumped 57% in just the 2011-2012 school year. That's up 10% since the 2007-2008 year. That increase coincides with the broader trend of increasing tuition costs. As such, President Obama's bus tour this week will seek to highlight college costs. In an email to supporters on Tuesday, he promised to take action to confront the issue, but offered no specifics on what his proposals will include. So how much does the burden of college debt impact you over the course of your life? Probably more than you think. I recently spoke with Robert Hiltonsmith. He is a policy analyst at Demos, and in a recent report called At What Cost, he wrote this as how student debt reduces lifetime wealth. Are you able to quantify it, how much a certain amount of student debt can hurt your earnings over the course of a lifetime?
So from our report, the way to think about it is there's kind of a multiplier of 4, right? So whatever your debt is, it's going to cut into your wealth by about 4 times that. So in our report, we have a $50,000 debt. Our household has a $50,000 debt, and it cuts into their earnings. I'm sorry, their lifetime wealth by about $200,000. So if you had a $25,000 debt, it might cause a wealth loss of about $100,000. This is actually a wealth loss. So this is really lost retirement savings, lost home equity because of having to pay back this debt, right? But you can also think of it in those terms. And so the standard number that's thrown out there is that a college degree is worth something like $1 million over a high school degree, right? So in one sense, this is kind of eroding about 1/5 of that earnings premium.
And it's funny because we think of student loans as, let's say, at an 8% rate, but you're saying in terms of your overall wealth, it could cost you 20% if you're just taking $50,000 in student debt.
That's right, and obviously for people with higher levels of debt, it'll cost them more. And the way this works is, of course, because you have to pay back student debt early in life, and when your salaries are in fact lowest, when you're trying to just start your financial future, it prevents you from making these kind of investments that are so important to make early in life. So it prevents you from saving for retirement early or from buying a house or as large of a house. And those lost investments kind of snowball over time because you lose all those earnings and accumulation and interest and such.
The wealth impact of student loans on today's students, the ones who are in college right now, how is that different, or is it different from previous generations, let's say their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation?
Well, the difference is that our parents or current students' parents and grandparents didn't have student debt. Student debt is really a phenomenon from the past 10, 15 years. 10 years ago, student debt was $250 billion, so it was a quarter of the current $1 trillion burden that people are carrying today. So it's really an entirely new phenomenon, and as we said, it's an entirely new kind of experiment in the way we do higher education, and all indications are that it's not looking good.
So student debt can cost up to 20% of somebody's lifetime wealth, their lifetime earnings and financial holdings. Congressman, we just went through a whole back and forth process about getting the student loan rate at whether 4% or doubled to 8% and then went back to 4%. What can be done to either help ameliorate some of that cost of financial aid or lowering the price of college?
Yeah, well, I think it was a good thing that we got the interest rate back down from almost 8% to below 4%. That's a good thing. That reduces the cost and therefore the burden on people. And look, we all got to acknowledge that we make no better investment in this country than we do in the education of young people. And look, in this generation, if you don't have further education after high school, forget about being middle class, right? You need something. You need vocational training, college, whatever it may be. But this is a hard one, right? And when you get beyond the bullet points, you got to remember that there's 2 products out there that you kind of can't say no to, right? One is healthcare, the other is education. And it's no coincidence that both of those products are growing at 10 and 11% a year. And so if all you do is make money available to people, which that's a good thing to do, what you're doing is you're driving demand. And if universities and colleges and the folks that are doing the training aren't forced or don't find some way to keep their costs down, you're going to get this spiral with more and more people being more and more indebted with all the consequences that were just discussed.
You know, one of the important things is about going to college is coming out and finding a job. Unfortunately, under the Obama administration, there's nothing for college students to come out and obtain. There are 24 million Americans who are underemployed or unemployed. Most of those Americans are young people. So there's no opportunities in the economics today, and that's because of the Obama economic policies.
How do we get this way, though?
Well, how do we get this way?
Right.
Because President Obama has failed as a president
so
to get an economic policy and get this country moving.
Democratic president, and that's when everything went down.
Look, he's been president for 6 years now. What are you going to blame it on Bush? 6 years? He said he's been president for 6 years.
If we look back to the last Democratic president, the country was doing quite well.
And that's because of the Republican president who increased taxes and decreased debt.
Okay, let me reel this back in, because we're talking about jobs after college. And right now there's a lot of 18, 17-year-olds out there worried about just getting to college and being able to afford it. What can we do? Can we offer 0% that gets cheaper money for the loans that are coming out there, but that doesn't lower the cost of tuition?
Well, I think there's some concrete things we can do. One is to really support our public institutions. They are the affordable place. I know in my district, if you come out of Roosevelt High School or one of the public high schools in Yonkers, you're going to go to community college, generally speaking, if you are college bound, because there is an opportunity for a quality 2-year education. If you do well, you can go into the SUNY system. We need to put enough money in our public colleges and universities because they are a more economical, good alternative. Secondly, transparency in the cost of college. Really, it is very hard to figure out what you're going to owe, how long it's going to be, and for example, what's the job placement rate? Out of a college that costs $40,000 versus a college that costs $20,000. If you're making the decision for your kid, shouldn't you have that information? The more information that we can give to parents and to students in a very readable way, that will help make decisions. But investment in public institutions is my number one.
The congressman hit it on the head. I mean, we may have a partisan debate, but this is a very serious topic in which the congressman said driving demand. You alluded to the same thing. That's the problem. We're looking at all of these great institutions of higher learning where it's all about increasing their endowment funds to levels God only knows where the money is going to, except for to build new buildings on campus. And the rates are just going up and up and up. You mentioned the public university system. First one in my family to go to college. I attended SUNY Cortland. I think it was $10,000 a year. My daughter went to grad school at Syracuse University. It was $50,000 a year. And they wanted their money cash. You don't pay, you don't register. Here's the problem. You mentioned what's the problem? I really believe this. Too many financial aid officers, kids don't know what they're getting into. They go here, sign this. It's a loan. Next thing you know, in some cases you start paying it back right away, but in most cases you don't. Next thing you know, you owe $20,000, $40,000, $80,000. We interviewed someone about a month ago that his debt is up to $200,000. How will you ever recover? That's a house.
And that's where you get into it's going to cost you up to 20% of your entire lifetime wealth, not just your earnings, but your wealth and investments and other things. Is it going to take generations of kids not going to private schools or to college at all to try to lower the cost? I mean, that would ease the burden.
Here's what I think. Education has now become a business, but it's not accountable. I think, I'm going back to your point about job placement. There was a school here in Westchester, and there was a law school in New York City that were sued in reference to misstatements about their job placement. We have 80, 90% job placement. Yeah, and 40% of those are people who are working at McDonald's and having college degrees. They misled the consumer, the educators who thought, listen, I picked this school because you had a high job placement rate. I've come here, I spent $100,000, $200,000. I get out and I find out, oh yeah, you can have a job making $30,000. How long is it going to take me to pay off this loan? We've got to have accountability when it comes to these educators, whether it's the public school system, private school system. There needs to be accountability, maybe a law. You won't hear me talking too much about passing a lot of laws, but maybe a law to hold them accountable and to their job placement numbers.
Anything on the agenda in Washington, Congressman, that might make this easier or might make a dent in this?
You know what? There have been a lot of good ideas put on the table here. The one, and I'm not sure a law is required, but one thing we need to remember is that there are very few educational institutions that aren't getting a lot of grant dollars to do research from the federal government, from states governments. And I think that we've got, because we provide that kind of money, I think we've actually got the right to step in and say, look, 10% annual inflation and tuition growth, you're going to set up a world where either kids aren't going to college, as you mentioned, or where kids have, today $1 trillion in student loan debt. This is starting to feel a little like the mortgage market, 6 years ago. If governments don't say, hey, you're getting a lot of money from us, we want you to seriously engage to keep your costs down, I think that's a lever that we've got to play.
All right, we're going to take a break here on RFL. Up next, what's our responsibility when it comes to affordable housing? Should every community be required to have affordable housing? We're going to get into that next. Stay with us.